Welcome. I'm James Milan, and we are here with Charlie Shapiro, who is a Democratic candidate to join the Massachusetts Governor's Council as councillor. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, James. I appreciate coming into Arlington Community Media.
Thanks. First, we're going to get right to reviewing the format of this interview. It will be a live-to-tape interview, and that means no edits once we begin. There was no pre-screening of questions, and answers will be limited strictly to 2 minutes each. We will start with a 1-minute opening statement from the candidate, and after the questions, we will conclude with a 1-minute closing statement. So, Mr. Shapiro, you have 1 minute for an opening statement.
Great. Thank you, James, and thank you to everybody in Arlington for caring about this race. You know, it's interesting, sometimes along the campaign trail we talk about the Governor's Council and Governor's Councillors being one of the most important positions that people don't actually know what they do. So one of my goals in this particular campaign, and we can get to some more specifics of course, is really a better transparency, a higher level, people really understanding what the Governor's Council does. Probably the most important thing it does is it votes on the judges' gubernatorial nominations. And that means the people that we're entrusting with ensuring social and economic justice, that's the #1 position, the #1 responsibility for a governor's councilor. Now, I'm a former Newton alderman. I'm the one that did the Silver Alert program, which is kind of like the Amber Alert, but for folks with Alzheimer's. The governor took that statewide. I was so proud to work with Governor Patrick and his safety team to roll that program out across the Commonwealth, and I look forward to the interview.
Thanks very much. We're going to go right into our questions now, and I will remind you, though perhaps I don't have to, that there is a 2-minute limit that I will be strictly enforcing. So the first question is, why are you running for councillor on the Governor's Council, and what prepares you to serve in this capacity?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. In fact, it's the foundational question, really, so I'm glad you did start with that. There are a number of reasons. First, when I was an alderman in the city of Newton, I was able to see that government can work, it can keep people safer. I mentioned the Silver Alert program, and I was very proud to be able to work on something that actually had the ability to keep people safer. To see that rolled out across the state and to work with such terrific public policy experts was exciting. So why Governor's Council, and how does this translate to Governor's Council? As I said, the Governor's Council essentially is the citizen's voice into the governor's nomination process. Now, what does that mean? In the case of judges, for example, there's a judicial nominating commission that's comprised of all attorneys. I'm not an attorney, by the way. I'm a former teacher. I was a reporter, somewhat like yourself in some ways, only with less hair. And I think that that really was something that motivated me to seek this position, because wanting to let people know what the council does, how important it is to the fabric of our democracy, was critically important to me. The transparency part is where my background and experience as a reporter came in, James. I think that something this important should be known by people. It should be transparent. People should be able to look to their constituent representative, your governor's councilor, and know that that person has your back, and that person is doing things on your behalf to interview the candidates, to really ask the great questions similar to what you're doing. You're essentially grilling me, as you should. And I think that somebody who is a governor's councilor needs to ask respectful questions. And I think that this is a council that has had some problems. The Globe and the Herald, for example, which agree on essentially nothing, both called the council dysfunctional and a circus. I want it to improve. I have the skills, the background to do that, and I look forward to the challenge.
Thanks very much. And you've already begun to address this question, but most people do not know a lot about the Massachusetts Governor's Council. So how would you describe the role and responsibility of the council, and why should Massachusetts residents be informed about the council's role and the decision making?
Sure. Well, the #1 thing, of course, is we need to be proud of every element of our government, every element of our democracy. This council has been somewhat challenging, and I think while people can do their own research, and this is an area, by the way, where I would encourage everybody in Arlington there's a lot of attentive, educated, involved, engaged people that live in Arlington. And I would just respectfully suggest that folks have just a few minutes out of their day to take the time to Google the Governor's Council, Google me, Google the incumbent, and really take a look at the differences and see why so many people are endorsing me, why after 16 years people are calling for a change on the Governor's Council. So I addressed some of the question at the top of the program. I can go into it a little bit more. Again, it's about social and economic justice. My entire life, my entire family, we were involved with social and economic justice. My mom was the president's counselor to Dr. Sacker at Brandeis. I was brought up with a volunteer sort of spirit. I'm Jewish and I'm from Newton, so it should not necessarily surprise somebody that I would be a progressive Democrat, and I am. And I think that, for example, as the pro-choice candidate in the race, the incumbent was endorsed by Mass Pro-Life a few years ago. I think that Democrats and independents that believe in a woman's right to choose and asking appropriate and yet respectful questions to potential judicial nominees about will they in fact protect the buffer zone law? Will they make it so that women have full and unimpeded access to health care, whatever that health care may be? I think the judges or prospective judges need to make sure that they are answering those types of questions. The incumbent is not asking those types of questions. She can speak for herself, of course. I would ask those types of questions in a respectful, thoughtful, logical manner, and that's part of what I'd like to do and part of why I feel it's important.
Thanks very much. What are the biggest challenges facing the Governor's Council, and what priorities would you support to address those challenges?
Well, there's several challenges. I mean, the number one challenge, I think, is the reputation of the council. And that really is something that's critically important. I mean, if people do not have faith in their governmental bodies, we have a real problem. And I think that this is something where clearly, as I mentioned, the Globe, the Herald, WBUR, for example, which I know a lot of folks in Arlington listen to, WBUR actually has had stories on the air and on their website, and you could Google Governor's Council WBUR and take a listen to what their stories were. I think what the key really is here is that there is a thread of misunderstanding about the council. There is a consistent sense over a number of years that the council is not operating at the level it really should. Now, if you go around and campaign the way I have, you might find it interesting that if you talk to 100 people, whether it's Arlington or any other of the 31 cities and towns that are in the district that comprises the 3rd District of Governor's Councilor, out of 100 people, you may have 5 or 6 people that know what the Governor's Council does and how important it is. I want the rest of the folks to understand how important it is. And this is not just about ensuring democracy. That's obviously critical. This is actually about making sure that people are comfortable with their government. And more importantly, the council has their meetings in the middle of the day, in the middle of the week. So a specific difference between the incumbent and myself is I would like to webcast those. I would like to make sure that the general public has a direct pipeline through me as their next counselor to making sure they know what's happening in the meetings, have the ability to chime in, whether it's email, whether it's text message, whatever it may be. I can do that. I can bring these changes to the council, and I'd be very proud to do that.
Thanks. Please give us one example of how you think the Governor's Council could have done more or better in the recent past.
Sure. That's actually an unfortunately easy question. There was a gentleman by the name of Joe Berman, an attorney from Weston, a progressive Democrat who had contributed to a number of Democratic causes and Democratic candidates. He was also a member of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which most people are familiar with. He was a member of that ADL, or the organization, at a time when the organization did not recognize the Armenian genocide, which clearly they should have. That's what it comes down to. So the incumbent prejudged that nominee and essentially sank his nomination because of her dislike, and I might even call it a personal grudge against the ADL that she had had going back to when she was a counselor in Watertown. It was wrong, it was reprehensible, and what was even worse about it, because there's no problem with thinking independently and really, as I said, grilling somebody, make sure you have all the answers, know where they're from, know where they're going. All of that is completely legitimate. But here's what was the problem with that. She didn't do her research. And the rest of the research showed that he was the gentleman that helped the ADL change their position and ultimately recognize that important historical fact. Now, the difficulty with that particular situation, and again, Google it, look it up, the Globe had articles, the Herald, and others as well. It's a very, very important distinction in the way that we would conduct ourselves. I would be very thoughtful, very grounded. I would do my research entirely, and I would never let any type of personal animosity or gripes get in the way of interviewing somebody for an important position and treating their experience as the #1 priority.
Thank you. Are there systems in place to assure that members of the Governor's Council give the governor thoughtful and valuable advice and not simply pursue personal agendas, rubber stamp the governor's agenda, that kind of charge from some critics?
Well, there's not enough systems, clearly. One of the difficulties about the Governor's Council is, and most people don't know this, and frankly, I didn't know this a few years ago. The Governor's Council of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, by Constitution, is not subject to the open meeting law. Now, in Arlington, of course, you have the various local meetings, you have town meeting, it's open to the public as it should be. Not the ones where you're voting, obviously, but just generally speaking, it's webcast, it's out there. Various individual boards are open to the public, all of that. The Governor's Council, it goes back to the 1600s, by the way, but the Governor's Council is not subject to the open meeting law. There are councilors on the council who would like it to be subject to the open meeting law. Now, that's a constitutional issue, but it has the ability to voluntarily comply with the open meeting law. The incumbent from Watertown chose to vote against that resolution. I believe that is because she takes great pride in having individual private meetings with each of the nominees. The difficulty that I have with that, quite frankly, is the other 7 councilors don't know what happens in those meetings, and neither does the public. I mean, it's not illegal. I just think it's wrong. And I think that when we're trying to take a look at government and make it more transparent, I think that those types of procedures need to be in place where the public truly has input. And it's interesting. I think that history has shown us that government and frankly people tend to behave better when the public is watching, especially government, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
What strategies would you use for working with others of opposing views? And what experience do you have implementing those strategies?
Sure. I actually have quite a bit of experience with that. I have what you call a mixed marriage. My wife is a Republican, thankfully a pro-choice, pro-equal marriage rights, pro-equal adoption rights, and wants to get us off of fossil fuels like I do Republican, which those are very, very rare, by the way. So that's probably why we still get along. But there are a few things we disagree about, and I am a lifelong progressive Democrat. We have friends of all stripes. We get along with people very well. I think that you can have a spirited discussion with people. I don't think you have to insult them. I don't think you have to denigrate them because they may disagree with you. For example, there are issues that I feel very strongly about, and hopefully judges would as well, which I think the prisons are overcrowded. I think we have to do more for treatment rather than locking people away for using marijuana, for example, personally. I think that to fill up our prisons for individual personal drug use is an absurdity. And I think that anybody who is, whether they're liberal, progressive, conservative, libertarian, whatever it may be that is along that spectrum, I think that almost everybody can agree that it's the right thing to do to help people in prison rehabilitate themselves so when they do come out, their behavior has an opportunity to improve because we've given them job skills. We've given them the opportunity to learn some new skills. And whether you're conservative, maybe you might do it if you're a conservative for a different reason, or if you're a progressive for a different reason. But those are things where if you help structure the argument, phrase the argument right, people can agree on things that are logical and that can help move forward an agenda of being helpful to people and do what government's supposed to do, which is be supportive and nurturing.
Next question is, what makes you the best candidate for office in this case?
Well, the first answer, of course, is that's not for me to ultimately say. If you go to my website, which is voteshapiro.org, voteshapiro.org. On the home page of the website, you will see 7 specific reasons why I believe you should vote for me. You know, it's interesting. I want to make sure that we're not personalizing anything political. I think it's critical that people have respect for the system. You know, I know that 2 years ago, I ran for this same office. And there was another gentleman from Brookline, actually. He and I both ran for this office of governor's councilor 2 years ago. He and I combined got approximately 60% of the vote. The incumbent received only about 40% of the vote. I think that told a story, not completely, but it certainly sent a message that 6 out of 10 people were open to change. And for a 14-year incumbent to have that, you know, that amount and have 60% open to a change, I think does say something. And now it's a 1-to-1 race, by the way. So it's just myself and the incumbent in the Democratic primary. I think that when you take a look at the issue of transparency, I am, as you probably can tell, I am completely committed to transparency. I mean, even, you know, it's funny, even on my literature that I hand out at town days and different events and things like that, I actually put my phone number. I work from home. I do higher education marketing, so I have the time and availability to, you know, to work for folks. I have my email address. It goes right to my cell phone, my home phone. I think that there are a lot of ways that I can prove that I'm the best candidate.
I'm afraid we have to move on.
Sure.
What criteria would you use in determining who is qualified to become a judge?
Sure. Critical question. There are 3 steps involved in someone becoming a judge in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. 3 very important steps, by the way. The first step is the Judicial Nominating Commission, the JNC. The JNC is 21 attorneys. They're all attorneys, by the way, and I believe that they should be. The JNC is essentially the human resources department, so to speak, for the Commonwealth when it comes to vetting judicial candidates. I believe it should stay that way, by the way, and not turn into a public spectacle. I think that when someone's applying for a judgeship, they should have that level of privacy, and then they can go, if they have been vetted and their name has been sent to the governor as a credible candidate, a qualified candidate. The next step is to step 2, obviously. The governor then chooses a name, vets the person again, and then sends that name to the governor's council. 3 steps. The private legal community, Bar Association and all of that. Then there is the executive branch. And then the final step is the governor's council. This is where the citizens have a voice, and they have not really had a voice recently. Those private meetings by the incumbent, again, while it doesn't break a law, I think it's simply wrong. I would open up those meetings and actually make that change that needs to be made. I mean, this is an important change that needs to be made. There should not be private meetings out of public view. The purpose of the governor's council should be to vet people and have public questioning in a respectful fashion at those governor's council meetings. That's what I will do. It's a tangible difference between me and the incumbent.
Thank you. And speaking of that, our last question is to ask you to please give us an example of an issue that you and your opponent agree on, and then 2 examples of issues on which you differ and why your positions represent the best interests of the Commonwealth on those.
Sure. One thing that we agree on is the existence of the Governor's Council. There are people that have called for the elimination of the Governor's Council. And while I certainly won't speak for my opponent, I believe that we are fairly well aligned on this one aspect of the position, the existence of the position. There is an alternative to having a Governor's Council, and I think people call for its elimination because when they read bad things about it in the paper, people naturally go, well, it's not handling itself right, it's an embarrassment, whatever it may be, let's get rid of it. But here's why you can't, or here's why you shouldn't. First, it's constitutional, but second, if you didn't have the Governor's Council, there are 8 members in the Governor's Council, by the way. If you didn't have the Governor's Council, you would then throw it to the Senate. Now you're up to 40 opportunities to politicize the process. And that's not so good. If you didn't do that, then you would have judges elected. I can't imagine a worse situation than that. If you're somebody like me who believes that you want to get the corrupting money out of politics, you want to get rid of the corrupting money, having judges elected is really bad. I mean, you can just automatically understand what a train wreck that could be. That's something that we agree on. The things that we disagree on, and frankly, there are more than 2 or 3 things that we disagree on. She feels the private meetings are okay. I believe they are completely wrong. She believes that the meetings that are happening in other areas of the state, Councillor Albano, Councillor Jubenville, who are on the council right now, have taken the initiative to go and do community meetings in the western part of the state. She refused to attend. It would be my pleasure to go out and have community meetings to solicit constituent input.
Thank you very much. And that concludes this part of the interview. You now have the opportunity to make a 1-minute closing statement.
Well, first, thank you again, James. I appreciate the opportunity to address the citizens and the voters of the community of Arlington. Arlington is critical to this election. And I'm not saying that just because I'm sitting here in Arlington. I'm saying that because it's true. Newton, Brookline, Arlington, Belmont, for example, these areas are the top vote areas. People in Arlington pay attention. Your vote absolutely matters. You can go to my website, see some endorsers, including Paul from the school committee, Heather and Lynn, who are on the Democratic Town Committee. There's a whole bunch of folks that have endorsed me. John Lawn has endorsed me, state rep from the hometown of the incumbent. Frank Smizik from Brookline, Brookline PAX. The Belmont Democratic Town Committee endorsed me. I received 90% of that endorsement. And I would just encourage you to do the research. Charlie Shapiro, it's Charles N. Shapiro, Councillor is what it says on the ballot. VoteShapiro.com is the website, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. And we do want to thank Mr. Shapiro for participating in our conversation today. Please make your voice count by voting at the state primary on September 9th. For Arlington Public News, this is James Milan. Thanks for joining us.